I'd like to introduce to you the Speaker of the House for the state of North Carolina, Mr. Thom Tillis. Mr. Tillis, we're very grateful to have you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everybody. Y'all have a seat. I'm glad to be here. We started, after the legislative session, we started talking about, the world's kind of changed. The governor, for the longest time, has always kind of owned the communications when we're not in session. So they'd go traveling across the state and pretty much be the face of the North Carolina government. When we got out of session, and you see a lot of the garbage that's printed in the newspaper and the blogs and misconceptions about what things are going on, we started thinking about the best way to combat that. And we decided to send a very clear message. We felt like we need to get out and make it clear that the legislative branch is a co-equal branch to the governor. And if the governor has any question about that, we can remind her that we overrode 6 of her vetoes over a 2 or 3 week period. And so what we wanted to do, what we really wanted to do is go out and get past the press and get to the county organizations and be accountable to you all. There are some things you probably like. There are some things that made you scratch your head. So when I go to a town hall, it's very different from a friendly group like this. Friendly in most cases. I hope 1 or 2 of you have a challenging question, because I like those more than the friendly questions. And I encourage you to ask them. But it's really to get out there and build a head of steam, because 2010 was a very important election. 2012 makes 2010 look like child's play in terms of what's at stake. We have got to get the president out of office, and we have got, one of the ways that we will do that, which also benefits my primary goal, which is to get the House back as a majority, and hopefully in the next term a supermajority. 72 votes, that regardless of what happens, and hopefully we'll have a Republican governor, but regardless of what happens in the gubernatorial race, I want enough members to where a conservative agenda for North Carolina can continue to be put into place. Now, before we get into maybe general questions and stuff, if y'all take a look at this document, in the center section, one of the things we were trying to do is communicate to everybody what we've been doing since we were in session. The legislative session that we completed was the shortest long session since 1973. It was also the most productive long session since they've been keeping statistics on the number of bills you file, the number wants to get ratified in law. We passed a budget that had $1.5 billion in tax cuts and over $1 billion in spending cuts. The governor vetoed it. We overrode it. We passed medical malpractice reform, workers' compensation reform, annexation reform, reform of the Employment Security Commission, at least phase 1, regulatory reform. We passed women's right to know. And in the process, we mounted one of the most significant reform efforts ever. Now, part of that was because we were pretty efficient. Part of that is because we had a lot of pent-up demand, having been in the minority for so long. But we got a lot done, and it's a first step. Quite honestly, in the Senate, you have 31 members, so they've got a supermajority. In the House, we don't have that. We have to get Democrats to vote with us if we think we're about to pass something that the governor would veto. So when you see us kind of moving around, and we may be moving in a direction that isn't ideal, don't count out the fact that it's just to move far enough to where we get that 4th vote that we may need to have a veto-proof majority. And we can talk a little bit about that. It may come up in questions y'all may have for me. Charles Thomas, who was here up until recently, he just had to take off. He was up until the last meeting. From Buncombe County, my chief of staff, has done an unbelievable job. And Bruce Goforth, who's a former Democrat member that I brought on specifically to recruit business Democrats to work with us on certain bills, have done an unbelievable job in helping us get those historic 6 veto overrides. Going into next year, we had the shortest long session since 1973. Going into next year, I want to have the shortest short session that there's ever been. Short sessions didn't even start up until I think the early 70s. But what we want to do is get into town and get out of town pretty quickly so that we can go back to campaigning in the new districts, which I believe will be pre-cleared, and we'll be running in them next year, with the goal of getting that magic number of 72 or 73 members. One thing that I have a personal interest here is, guys, if we can't, and it would be very difficult for a Republican to win in this county, but we can do a lot better than Ray Rapp in terms of trying to, if we can't find a Republican that can win, then you got to think through the money and the time that it would take to do it versus going out and finding a conservative Democrat that can take him out in a primary. Ray Rapp, on one day, about 3 weeks ago, voted against the defense of marriage, and he voted for a bill to end the state sanction of marriage. He's voted against our gun bills. He's voted against conservative bills that I've got to believe up in this neck of the woods could actually drive a different outcome in the primary. So if we don't think we've got a strong run in November, let's take Ray Rapp out in May. He may be a nice man, but he is no friend to business, and he's no friend to any kind of conservative ideology. So I, for one, would like to have him, give him more time to spend quality time with his family back here and not come back to Raleigh. And we need the help. And anything we can do there, honestly, if you've got friends that are, they're Democrats because their daddy was, but they're really kind of a Republican, closet Republican, let's get somebody in that primary and take them out. Even if we can field a Republican candidate, let's make them spend money. Because if we don't, Ray Rapp's going to raise money, and he's going to send it to other districts to help them try and challenge us and beat us in other districts. So we want to spread them out. And that's an important reason why I try and come here and talk to county party organizations, because we need the help there. Again, next year it's going to be a short session. About all we're going to do is figure out what we got to do with the budget and regulatory reform. Outside of that, we'll have defense of marriage on the ballot in May. And we'll all be working on getting reelected, and then coming back in January of 2013 and kind of focusing on tax reform. Figure out a way to kind of broaden our base and lower the rate, try and come up with a fairer tax system in North Carolina. And that will be my last term. The one bill that I hope, the only bill I sponsored this year was a bill to put me out of a job, which is term limits on the Speaker and the President pro tem. We sent a bill over to the Senate. Y'all can help me out with Ralph and the Senate members. We sent a bill over from the House that was 2 consecutive terms, 4 years. The Senate came back and sent us a bill that's 4 consecutive terms, 8 years. It's too long. You get a leader in power for that long, they actually think they're taller, better looking, and funnier than they really are, and they start taking control.
Well, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I mean, not me. But we have got to find a way to limit the concentration of power, and it starts with the position I'm in and the position the President pro tem is in. And we need help to put pressure on the Senate to at least come back and say 3 consecutive terms. 4 years is too long, and we don't want to miss the opportunity to actually have that on the ballot in November. So I would appreciate your help with your local senator here to kind of convince him he needs to get on board with the shorter term limit. Eminent domain will be on the ballot. We've already passed it out of the House. It's in the Senate. We need to make sure the Senate gets that done and gets it ready to be on the ballot. That's a bill, that's a referendum that's going to prevent counties and towns from being able to condemn property, take it away from one property owner, and then give it to another property owner for some public purpose. And there's a lot of abuses. We want to avoid that one. And the final one that will probably be on the ballot in November will be a constitutional amendment. We don't know exactly what the wording will be, to assert our right as a right-to-work state. In the event that the federal government tries to strip us of that, which would immediately start the spread of labor unions in North Carolina, we want to have another legal basis for saying your federal government's not going to tell us how to run our workers' laws in this state. And so that will probably be on the ballot too in November. Y'all may know defensive marriage will be on the ballot in the primary in May. It may get delayed based on redistricting, but will probably happen in May. That's all I got. Anybody got questions or comments? Don, you go first. I just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off, get it out of the way.
Let's talk about a topic that I talked to Jordan with a while ago on the way in. The Republican Party has the label of not being an environmental party. Well, I'm an environmentalist of the worst kind, because I think there's a lot of things you can do to make money if it's done properly. But Diener has not done his job in North Carolina. We know that with Bev Perdue's investment into coastal properties and rapid permit passing, and they've totally ignored, Diener has totally ignored a CTS plant here in Asheville. And that's a very, very complicated issue, but I think that the party could win a lot of votes from the average middle-class American, because they know that people have stood out there and died because they have drunk that water that was contaminated, and dealers ignored it.
Well,
So is there anything we can do in that area?
you got a kindred spirit in Charles Thomas on that issue in terms of groundwater quality here. Yeah, I don't know mechanically where that is in the Diener process. So that as a specific item, we probably, if you and Charles haven't spent much time talking about it, you should, because that's something that he worked with when he was a member and is still working as my chief of staff to kind of figure out what we can do there. But I will tell you, there's a lot of environmental policy where Diener has gone too far and controls too much to no real benefit to the citizens and to the environment.
They don't do what they should, and what they should do, they don't do.
The funniest, how many of y'all have heard of Mitch Gillespie?
Oh, yeah.
He's from McDowell County. You know, if you've never been to Raleigh, the legislative building has this big lawn area, and you have the Department of Education, and then you have more legislative building here. Well, Mitch is, and then at the very end, you have the building that Diener's in. It's a high-rise. I went into his office one day. He's at the very end, looking out of the back, and I noticed this, like, you know, one of the dots you have to mark things on a map. And he had it on his glass. I said, well, what is that? And he said, well, you got to sit in my chair to understand this. I sat down in his chair. He says, you see how I'm painting a target on Diener up there? And he's pointing right up to the 5th floor of the building. The regulatory reform that we passed that the governor overrode, vetoed, and then we overrode, is the first step towards saying you better have a business case and there better be a higher purpose served for the cost incurred for the regulation. That's kind of phase one. What we're now doing with our select committee, joint select committee on regulatory reform, is going to Diener, going to DOT, going to other areas where regulations affect, or where you're interacting with individual citizens, and trying to figure out if there is a good justification for it, that it's a higher purpose versus things that has been layered on top of time after time. At a local level, we're trying to figure out a way to make the towns and counties interact in a more productive way with people, like people getting a permit to open a business, developers, because they do a really lousy job now, and now is the time that we actually have to make it easier if we're going to move the economy along. And we don't want to do that with laws necessarily. What we want to do is kind of have a carrot versus a stick. So the towns and counties, I don't know how we're measuring it, we're trying to figure out how to do it, but the towns and counties that do a better job of working with developers could become qualified for grants and other consideration that the towns and counties that do not won't, or it'll at least be a part of the grading. So if the People's Republic of Chapel Hill or Asheville, I don't know how y'all feel about their regulatory environment, wants to be less friendly to business, then they're more or less on their own, and the state will favor the towns and counties that have a more streamlined, fairer, expedited permitting process or regulatory process.
Would you consider possibly passing legislation that would enable the states or the counties to actually offer incentives in their county taxes for proper building activities?
Yeah.
I mean, these old boys have been grading these mountains for years and know how to do it.
Well, and I've got one very liberal town in my district, Davidson. It's actually, now it's almost transition now because they annexed an area of voluntary annexation that's actually helped it become more Republican. But they wanted me to run a local bill authorizing them to require all residential property, even single family, to have, why am I losing it? Fire, sprinkler systems. Even resident sprinkler systems. And I said, why don't we provide you with some way to where if you want to incent a business to consider it, because they can use it as a marketing tool, maybe give them some benefit. But the builder that doesn't want to do it because it's just going to price them out of the market, why don't you come up with something like that? Because I'm not likely to go that far, but that's the same concept.
Same concept.
Same concept. Yes, sir.